Welcome along, everyone. We've got another progress review. Ted Henniker talking about doubt aversion theory. You've got the floor, Ted.
Okay, thanks, Pete. So I'm just going to run through this as quick as I can. Impetus behind my PhD, just the general sort of goal, some of the things that got me along doing this PhD. The first is wanting to get a better understanding of self-destructive and counterproductive behaviour, sort of thing you might call irrational even, sort of thing that produces regret when people undermine their interests. Why? This sort of thing. Can we build interventions to increase critical thinking disposition and feedback literacy as well? So those sorts of questions from the educational space. I'm also very interested in conflict resolution. So there's sort of a moral argument that I've got in the back of my head here, which is this idea that if we do want to do conflict resolution, especially across cultural lines, then our beliefs ought to be accountable to empirical evidence. And this, of course, does suppose that we want to resolve these sorts of conflicts. And the reason I say this is because reality is the thing that we all share, and it seems like the sort of obvious common meeting place to meet upon in a discussion. There is a challenge to this argument from a literature on adaptive fictions. You know, you can have false beliefs that are nevertheless very useful and can evolve and so on, like, you know, believing it's bad luck to be under a ladder. That could help you survive. Even though it's superstitious, but I'm just going to limit that view to topics that people might actually fight over as well. So, project refresher. Last year I talked about wishful thinking as a phenomenon and motivated reasoning as a theory. This year I'm going to zoom out a bit, discuss the project as a whole. Structure has now settled into place, and I'll also introduce the main sort of result of my PhD, which is my own theory here. I've done a lot of work since the last progress review. I've analysed cognitive dissonance theory, I've analysed psychological immune system theory, and time constraints are going to prevent me from really getting into it like I did in the last two progress reviews that I've done. So just a quick overview of the project status. I've got 7 chapters at the moment. One of them's actually being reviewed at the moment. The others are in various states of completion, really not as many words down as I would have liked, but I've done a lot of conceptual work. Structure of my argument today, I'm going to talk, my argument today is structured around this concept of root cause analysis, which is a technique from quality engineering that involves looking for a sort of high return on investment lever, if you like, or to pull it as an intervention by repeatedly asking why. It's actually a method that was invented by Toyota. It's a chain argument, essentially. That's the essence of it. In the background, I'm also asking the question how, because we need to get into mechanisms and things like that as well. So roughly, I'm going to say irrationality is explained by implausible belief updating. Implausible belief updating is explained by wishful thinking. Wishful thinking is explained by doubt aversion, and doubt aversion is explained by its metacognitive neglect. And we'll get into all of that. So some limitations just to touch on. I haven't done a full review of theories of irrationality here. I'm going to rely on Gigerenzer. I didn't do a systematic review for theories of wishful thinking, just a narrative style review, so I could have missed some theories. I haven't built or tested any interventions on this theory. That's a job for a psych department. And it's early days as well, so there's going to be kinks to iron out, and I'm sure we'll find some today. So what is irrationality? There's this concept called the rationality wars that Gerd Gigerenzer outlined. As a contestant, he said, not an observer, not pretending to be objective here. 3 competing views of rationality, and he described them as Homo economicus, Homo heuristicus, and Homer Simpson. The first is logical rationality. That's the stuff from the Cold War, but based on expected utility theory, which itself is based on expected value theory. We can go right back there. And this is this idea that human behaviour is largely rational, so rational choice theory is built on this, for example, and game theory. There's a trade-off between accuracy and effort in this paradigm, but this can't deal with high uncertainty or computational intractability, so it's very suited to small worlds, the game of chess being the paradigmatic example. Second is the cognitive bias program, which we're probably all familiar with, Kahneman and Tversky and so on. Human behaviour in this paradigm is irrational, in fact, predictably so. Deviations from logical rationality thought to reveal stable cognitive biases, which were in turn thought to underlie social problems which justified government paternalism. So Obama and Biden both had misinformation SARS, and they were in place because of this paradigm. Ecological rationality is the third paradigm here. So Judgments about rationality here depend on the context or environment. Logical rationality prizes internal logical consistency. Ecological rationality prefers actual performance in the world. That's the important thing. So it's a pragmatic sort of view of rationality. Now, my perspective on this is that there's value in all three paradigms. Logical rationality is good for where optimization is possible, but you do need tractability, time, algorithms, and compute to do that. Ecological rationality is optimal under time, pressure, or situations of computational intractability. And then biases and heuristics program, that also has some truth to it as well. Each paradigm here comes with its own view of rationality. I'm really interested in behaviours that all three of these paradigms agree are irrational. And I'm operationalising this as implausible belief updating. This includes things like failing to seek or acknowledge counter-evidence, even reinterpreting counter-evidence as evidence, and this is particularly weird or irrational absent severe uncertainty or time pressures. So the net effect here is we can end up with delusional or evidence-resistant beliefs and poor or counterproductive decision-making. So we'll get into some phenomena. Two main literatures have documented implausible belief updating. So the first is cognitive dissonance theory, which is Leon Festinger's theory from 1957. He wrote a book called When Prophecy Fails, where he and a bunch of other researchers went and infiltrated a cult. And then this cult had a doomsday prophecy, and he was there to see what would happen when the prophecy failed. And they hypothesized after the results were known. And they came around and said, well, actually, it was all called off because we assembled here today. The belief disconfirmation paradigm is the paradigm that sort of was built by Festinger to sort of explain this stuff. And we can just think of that as mental gymnastics, essentially. Rationalization gets close to it as well. And this is mainly a social identity phenomenon in the way that Festinger framed it as well. So it happens particularly in public, where reputation is at stake and things like that. The second literature is literature on optimism bias. Tali Sharot over here is the main figure in this literature. And she talks about the systematic underestimation of risk that about 80% of the people that she has studied have. Discounting bad news, we can then end up with implausible beliefs. And we can end up very surprised by what other people around us think is very, very obvious. And the most obvious evidence of this implausible belief updating stuff comes from what Eric Mandelbaum, he called the actual stock of beliefs. I really like that quote. Millions of Australians confidently hold implausible beliefs. This can mean false or unfalsifiable, very clearly so. I don't have time to really get into this because of the time limit today, but I'll just draw your attention to one of these examples, which is 4% of Australians strongly believing vaccines can cause autism in 2017. That's 1 million people. That's a lot of people. That's just the people who are adamant. Doesn't seem possible to maintain these sorts of views without systematically avoiding and discounting evidence to the contrary. And we're all probably familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect. Optimism bias, Tali Sharot says, inferences are critical to decision making, enabling us to prepare our actions so as to avoid harm and gain reward. Given the importance of that, we might expect the brain to possess accurate, unbiased foresight. But in fact, we have a surprising and pervasive bias, which is when it comes to predicting what will happen to us tomorrow, next week, 50 years from now, we overestimate the likelihood of positive events and we underestimate the likelihood of negative events. And this is an example here from the domain of Huntington's testing. That top line there is what an expert thinks according to, as the motor score increases, how likely that person is to have Huntington's. The next line down is what the person who actually has that motor score thinks. So we can see people are systematically underestimating the likelihood that they have Huntington's disease. This has actually been quantified as well. You can just see, I'll just draw your attention to the red point over here, which is far, far lower than the blue point. Bad news does not update beliefs as much as good news does. Good news is almost optimally Bayesian, in fact. Now, the belief disconfirmation paradigm from Festinger and the like. So this is an older study, but Batson here in 1975 asked 50 Presbyterian students to publicly identify as believers or non-believers. It's important that that was done in public. 42 of them ended up in the belief group. 8 of them ended up in the non-belief group. Then all of those people were provided with convincing second-hand evidence that the New Testament is fraudulent, as convincing as the researchers could make it. 11 of the 42 believers ended up explicitly accepting that disconfirming evidence as true. So then what happened? Something very weird happened. Their belief increased. Bayesian reasoning cannot explain that behavior. It's very strange. And that experiment was informed by dissonance theory because dissonance theory can predict that result. Now, just a quick summary of some of the effects we're looking at here. With optimism bias, we've got unrealistic optimism, which is overestimating the likelihood of good news, underestimating the converse. Overconfidence as well, self-serving biases, inflated views of the self, and that includes the better than average effect, where most people think they're better than the median, and then overplacement effect, where most people think they're better than others. You use different experimental paradigms to get those. And then also this sort of confidently incorrect phenomenon where there's readily available and overwhelming counter evidence and people have a lot of confidence regardless. And then we've also got these perverse belief disconfirmation effects that we just talked about as well. So that stuff all sits at this level of the phenomenon. So what might actually explain it? Ziva, author of Motivated Reasoning Theory, said there's sort of two options: confirmation bias and desirability bias or wishful thinking. Confirmation bias being where expectations are guiding our belief updating, and desirability bias being where motivations are guiding our belief updating. Both appear to work together. Confirmation bias where the evidence is clear, and desirability bias where evidence is vague or subjective. And some researchers have done some good work on this. They said even if motivation only affects overconfidence in purely subjective contexts, those contexts are not entirely uncommon. The upshot here is that we get wishful thinking whenever evidence is open to interpretation. Politics, media, workplace, personal relationships, most of life. And there's some work actually that's been done from the political realm, which shows a very strong desirability bias and not a very strong confirmatory bias. So why and how does this wishful thinking stuff happen? There's 4 theories that I've found in scope, and underlined is the proposed motivations. So the first is adaptive self-deception theory, which I talked about in my first progress review. People have evolved to be unaware of their own lies so as to more effectively benefit from them. The second is cognitive dissonance theory. That says people are driven to reduce dissonance discomfort by either removing dissonant cognitions, adding new consonant cognitions, or trivializing them. Motivated reasoning theory from Ziva. It says people are attempting, with directionally motivated reasoning, to maintain a seemingly rational illusion of objectivity when they're motivated to believe a particular conclusion, to view themselves positively, and to persuade dispassionate observers. And psychological immune theory from Dan Gilbert and others. He's got this concept of immune neglect, where people are systematically underestimating how quickly their mood will return to baseline after bad news, because they automatically rationalise, reconstrue, and trivialise such news. And he calls these sense-making processes, which has the function of recovering mood. So this is a sort of affective theory. Value of these existing theories, inaccurate referencing and so on that I talked about in the first theory. Cognitive dissonance theory here is a cognitive and affective theory. That's pretty well accepted. It's widely applied, 50 years of research, and there's even been some work on the neural basis, which is very interesting. Can't easily be used in this case, though, because it's a bit general. Motivated reasoning theory as a social and cognitive theory, well accepted again, 35 years of research, seems pretty consistent. There is an unclear mechanism here. Ziva actually offered 3 different mechanisms. There's ambiguous terminology, and there's some counter-evidence as well from these researchers, which is worth integrating. And psychological immune theory and affective theory, again, pretty consistent with the literature, specifically from affective forecasting, also internally consistent, but there's potentially some cultural biases with that one, and there's also not really much elaboration on sense-making processes and psychological defenses, which is okay. I mean, he relies on some other literature to sort of talk about that. But the main point here is that existing theories are a bit limited in the insight they can provide here, and I need to do some synthesis and building upon. So the motivations that are proposed in these existing theories are emotional, so we've got avoiding discomfort, mood stabilization, and maintaining self-esteem. And there's also social, so being persuasive, being confident, competent. There's even discussion of identity protection. What's missing here is a metacognitive element. How do we appraise our own thinking? Just a quick refresher on cognitive dissonance theory. Dissonance discomfort is an aversive or stressful state of cognitive inconsistency. Cognitions here can include beliefs, attitudes, and behaviours. So if your belief is out of whack with your behaviour, you can get this dissonance discomfort. And this dissonance is an alarm that the system integrity is compromised. Doubting can create this dissonance by revealing inconsistencies, which would make doubting aversive. There's two main strategies for coping with dissonance. The first, you can eliminate the inconsistency, and the second is you can eliminate the awareness of the inconsistency. So problem-focused coping and emotion-focused coping correspond to those. There's recently been some research on curiosity that's discovered there's sort of a second type of curiosity, a dark side of curiosity, specifically deprivation curiosity, as it's called. So interest curiosity refers to the general motivation to learn new things and the joy of exploring. Deprivation curiosity refers to the desire to reduce the unpleasant feelings associated with uncertainty. In this case, that's a type of dissonance. Now, finally, onto my theory, doubt aversion theory. So I start by noting that by definition, wishful thinking is self-serving. It fulfills the subject's desire or desires in some way, and the resulting belief is accordingly valued as a resource of sorts. Were the subject to examine this belief, they stand to potentially lose those benefits. Ziva Kunda had a term for this, directionally motivated reasoning with the goal of meeting some desire other than accuracy. My hypothesis is that this risk of loss causes hostility to self-examination and also to its social counterpart feedback. In other words, wishful thinking brings with it an aversion to the act of doubting in the form of deprivation curiosity, despite such questioning in other circumstances bringing joy in the form of interest curiosity and learning. Doubt aversion protects self-serving or valued beliefs from the assaults of the external world and is therefore a crucial element of the mechanism of wishful thinking, explaining the resistance to evidence. Without doubt aversion, wishful thoughts would readily dissolve under scrutiny, and with its inverse, which you might call doubt positivity or something, people can be expected to self-scrutinise on their own accord. Doubt and critical thinking. So doubt is at the heart of critical thinking. So this is just the APA definition of critical thinking that I'm using here with the 6 different things. And we see querying evidence, conjecturing alternative, self-examination, correction. They all involve some element of doubt. Critical thinking, you can kind of compare a little bit to exercise, right? It's good for us. Few of us do enough of it. There is a social desirability factor where we all want to think that we're good at it and that we're fit in this case. It's also not like exercise in that we all agree that exercise is good for us, but I don't think we necessarily all agree that self-examining or seeking feedback is good for us. Doubt as a resource, doubt as a threat. I think we've got a long way to come if we want to live in a society of critical thinkers. We've got to think it's worthwhile, we need to know how to do it, and we need to set aside time and actually do it. I'm focusing obviously on the appraisal element here. So what's the mechanism that I propose for this doubt aversion? So in the field of self-regulated learning, Pintrick here summarised 3 types of metacognitive knowledge: declarative, procedural, and conditional. So that's our knowledge of learning strategies, how to use those strategies, and then when and why to use them. Knowing when and why to doubt in this case. So I expect that low conditional metacognitive knowledge about doubt lowers critical thinking disposition, the tendency to think critically, as well as feedback literacy, the ability to work constructively with feedback. Constructive conflict also seems next to impossible if the people having the conflict don't agree on the value of doubt. So what are people's reservations here? There's a whole bunch that we can think of, right? Critical thinking in general isn't fun. There's a really good meta-analysis which Jason sent to me, thank you Jason, on the unpleasantness of thinking. Doubt is paralysing, leads to inaction and missed opportunities. That could be an ecological rationality sort of perspective. Doubt is weaponised by our enemies who want us to lose faith in our leaders. We've got FUD campaigns which do that. Confidence is strength, doubt is weakness. That's the strongman epistemology. Doubt might create conflict. That's the opposite of the strongman epistemology. Doubt is disrespectful to tradition, undermines authority and stability. Doubt might leave me without a foundation on which to base my worldview. And I've spent time in therapy for doubting myself too much, right? Perhaps you can think of others. There's a whole litany of different things you could put in this box, right? Now, I'm not going to respond to those objections to the act of doubting. That's not my purpose here. My main point is no wonder people don't like self-examination or feedback. I wouldn't either if I thought that way. We see here what I call metacognitive neglect, the failure to examine metacognitive assumptions. Each of these objections has readily available counter-arguments, and the objections are functioning as thought-terminating cliches, which is unsurprising because one would need to doubt in order to examine those metacognitive assumptions. So my main hypothesis here is that negative attitudes towards doubt caused by this metacognitive neglect are a root cause of wishful thinking and, by extension, irrationality. And we end up with this reinforcing causal loop of doubt aversion. So doubt aversion, metacognitive neglect, and back to doubt aversion. Doubt-positive people don't have this problem. They can examine their own attitudes towards doubt just fine. So a summary of the theory. Implausible belief updating is largely a manifestation of wishful thinking. Wishful thinking caused by emotional and socio-cultural factors, which comes from those other theories that I've examined. And it's maintained by a metacognitive factor, doubt aversion. Doubt aversion being the view that doubt is not valuable. Doubt aversion is in turn maintained through metacognitive neglect, lacking knowledge as to the epistemic and practical value of doubt. Implausible belief updating can therefore be reduced or perhaps eliminated by intervening on these factors. And regardless of one's stance in the rationality wars, that, like doubt aversion and its metacognitive neglect, is fundamentally irrational and by extension self-destructive, also antisocial because of the role in conflict. The value of this theory, it's based on well-accepted theories, makes specific predictions, it's falsifiable. We could modify doubt aversion without observing reductions in wishful thinking, or we could find evidence-resistant wishful thinking in the absence of it. It's actually a theory, it's not a phenomenon. And there's a comparison here we can make with cognitive dissonance theory, where doubt is sort of filling the role of dissonance. Doubt is a behaviour which can cause a certain state. And this model is also, for me, very relatable. I've certainly felt the urge to avoid checking to see if my own beliefs have internal inconsistencies. I've been the person who's confidently incorrect and hopes nobody notices. I've been the person to get defensive when corrected. I've witnessed both phenomena in others. And I've extensively doubted the value of doubt, especially as a younger person, given the conflict that it can create with others, ironically. What are the implications? This is my last slide. Fundamentalists, mental gymnasts, wishful thinkers, I think a lot of intellectuals find them very frustrating. And the standard technique is to write them off as brainwashed, self-deceiving, or in Hillary Clinton's case, deplorables. This got us where we are. We've obviously seen a lot of, polarization and so forth. I think instead we should use our empathy to resolve these differences. I think intractable conflict can be made tractable here. There's 3 types of interventions I'd suggest: emotional, socio-cultural, and metacognitive. So helping people self-regulate with problem-focused coping, changing conversational norms, and then just some PR for doubt, Who's advocating for doubt? Other than the Critical Thinking Project, which is doing a great job. If we can get people on the same page about the value of self-examination and feedback, then I think it should be possible to have constructive conflict about other matters. Thanks for listening.
Thanks very much, Ted. Floor is open for questions if people have questions.
Sorry for talking too quickly. I did the test and it ran for 30 minutes and I had 20 minutes to give it. So.
Great job, Ted. Just like when you're doing the root cause analysis, I just went into chicken and egg mode, and why is the aversion to doubt basic rather than, say, the desire to be right?
That's a good question. So the basic thing in the root cause analysis is the metacognitive neglect of doubt aversion rather than the doubt aversion itself. Why is it not the desire to be right? Well, the desire to be right would be one of the objections to doubt in this theory. Does that make sense? So it would be one of the reasons people would give for not doubting. So yeah, you could definitely draw a circle there. There is a feedback loop.
Yeah, well, that's what I was wondering. You've certainly got a reinforcing feedback loop.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the desire to be right is basic. I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure why you need something being so fundamental rather than there being this you know, this reinforcing negative feedback loop.
Yeah, so you could break that feedback loop in two places, and doubt aversion would suggest that the place to break that is on the doubt aversion side, but yeah, you could break it on the other side.
Because it's just like, I mean, you've just been actually working with the police, and they keep saying one of the biggest barriers to critical thinking in their organisation is ego, right? So, and is, you know, so that seems more related to, you know, wanting to be right all the time, or
Yeah.
I reckon people hate being wrong more than they like being right.
Yeah, especially publicly, right? And that's that social element that you're referring to. And that's all incorporated in the, because my view is that the social and the emotional factors are caused by the metacognitive factors. But you might suggest that the cause works differently there. So yeah, maybe that's something I should look further into and tidy up.
That's something you could test, right? I mean, I mean, I'm just worried that, you know, like, I mean, you say it's verifiable and testable and so on, but would you actually be able to tell the difference in practice? I'm not a psychologist, so.
I think, I'm pretty sure there's research out there that's looked at that kind of bias.
Yeah, there are ways to sort of pull that apart with 2x2 research methodologies. Yeah.
Even so, I think it's a good phrase. It just gives another dimension to the ways in which you can talk about this. And I think your list of why people, you know, avoid doubt, actually that's quite actionable and useful. I was just thinking we could probably use that list with the police.
That was what I was
quite well.
thinking.
So there's a utility to this framing, which, you know, even if you're not going to make the ontological claim about it, it has a utility that could be, you know, we could leave that question open. I think it's useful that way. Could you tell me, do you think that the ultimate state of doubt aversion is just dogmatism, and that's it? That's really as simple as that?
Yeah, ultimate inflexibility. So, like, zero ability to change beliefs in the face of changing information. Yeah, absolutely. And that dogmatism, I think, even deeper than dogmatism is the concept of delusion, which dogmatism is a part of. And the element that makes something a delusional belief, as I understand, is its complete irresponsiveness to the outside world, to evidence.
You know, that research that shows that dogmatic individuals in moments or in situations of uncertainty are less likely than others to inquire, and the greater the uncertainty, the less likely they are to inquire. So it's kind of a lock. So it does seem
Yep.
a manifestation as doubt aversion, whatever the root.
Yeah, I do think dogmatism is pretty close to as doubt averse as you can get. Absolutely. Corinna?
Based on your point about ego, I wonder if you noticed in the experimental evidence that you've looked at, is there a difference in people's belief updating when they're given good or bad news, if the belief that they're updating is to do with their identity or not to do with their identity?
There is a literature on that called identity protective cognition, or also known as cultural cognition, Dan Kahan being the main person. Really, that theory should be alongside the four that I've analysed. It's probably the biggest thing I can see wrong with my thesis at the moment. But that is obviously a huge amount of work to go and properly analyse that. Yes, I do think identity plays a big role.
There's all that stuff about refutation texts and things like that, and how they impact depending on how people see the belief attached to their identity or not. There's a huge amount of stuff on that.
Yeah, it's very...
And I take it that one of the main ways to sort of update, help people update their beliefs is make it clear to them that your view of them doesn't depend on them, or even that their view of themselves shouldn't depend upon whether this belief is true or false. And that seems to be one of the main types of interventions, doesn't it?
And then the other one that we've talked about before is the epistemic belief stuff.
Yeah.
Go for the belief itself, but go for their belief about beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah, the method, not the result of the method. Yeah. Lily?
Lily.
Awesome, fascinating, very interesting. I just wonder, how much does fear come into it?
Fear.
Yeah, fear is motivating, it's even fear, even deluding yourself that the way you're feeling isn't fear but something else, which is motivating your belief.
Did you want to have fun?
What's that?
we're talking about FUD, we didn't say what FUD.
Yeah, so FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt. FUD campaigns are, that's one element where fear comes in, and that's one of the reasons that people might not want to doubt. For example, Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes is often pointed to as an example of, big oil or big tobacco using doubt as a way to reduce the belief in climate science or whatever. Another place you would see fear is, again, in that objections slide, is maybe fear would be one of the reasons that... I think fear is probably behind a lot of those objections, actually. So I think that's where it would come into the theory.
I was actually going to jump in earlier, but now you bring up Oreskes' Merchants of Doubt. You say at the very end, doubt has bad PR, but maybe you mean implicitly self-doubt has
Yes.
bad PR, because doubt has pretty good PR depending on who you are. Everyone likes to be a self-proclaimed skeptic about science because that's what scientists do, in scare quotes. And so actually there's a lot of doubt, but you mean kind of doubting your own...
Yeah, doubting the verb. Yeah, exactly. Doubting. Yes, absolutely. And it reminds me a little bit actually of, one of the objections to doubting is, it might cause conflict, but actually, ironically, not doubting oneself can prolong conflict. So it's a similar sort of thing where, doubting, I should make it clear, I'm talking about the verb form here. Yeah.
Yeah, too much surety.
Yeah, exactly.
Any final questions from our audience? If not, let's all thank Ted again.
Thank you, everybody.